On January 7, 1991, the Secretary of Defense walked into a Pentagon press room and canceled the most expensive Navy aircraft program in American history. He did not cancel it for the government's convenience. He canceled it for default, meaning the contractors had failed to perform what they had been paid to build. In his own words, "No one could tell me how much the program was going to cost, and data that had been presented turned out to be invalid and inaccurate." This is the story of the A-12 Avenger II, the Navy's stealth attack aircraft, the largest single defense termination in U.S. history, and the lawsuit that ran for 23 years. The Navy's primary strike aircraft in the 1980s was the Grumman A-6 Intruder. It had entered service in 1963. By the mid-1980s, it was 20 years old, subsonic, and visible to every modern Soviet air defense radar. The Soviet integrated air defense system had matured. New SA-10 and SA-12 surface-to-air missile systems could engage non-stealthy attack aircraft at long range. The Navy needed a strike platform that could go where the A-6 could not. In 1983, the Navy opened the Advanced Tactical Aircraft Program, a carrier-capable, all-weather, low-observable strike platform to replace the A-6 in every mission it flew. Concept design contracts went out in November 1984. By 1988, the Navy had chosen its design. McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics, partnered, would build a flying wing stealth aircraft to carry the A-6 payload, fly the A-6 range, and meet a stealth standard the Navy had never asked for before. They signed a fixed-price development contract for $4.8 billion. The A-12 was a triangle, a pure flying wing with no vertical tail, no horizontal stabilizer, no fuselage protrusion. Inside the Pentagon, the design picked up a nickname, the Flying Dorito. Inside the wing, two internal weapons bays carried the full A-6 payload, bombs, anti-radiation missiles, Harpoon anti-ship missiles. Nothing hung from external pylons. Every surface had to be radar-quiet from every angle. The skin was composite, graphite epoxy with embedded radar-absorbent layers. The Navy had never operated a carrier aircraft built primarily from composites at this scale. Neither had its contractors. The whole airframe had to survive carrier catapult launches and arrested landings, loads that would stress the composite structure in ways nobody had data for. The Navy was asking for stealth, range, payload, and carrier deck robustness in the same airframe. The aircraft kept gaining weight. By 1990, the predicted empty weight was 8,000 pounds over the contract target, roughly 30% over the design specification. Heavy enough that the Navy began to question whether the airframe could still make catapult speed with a full combat payload. First flight had been scheduled for June 17, 1990. By the end of that year, it had slipped to December 1991, 18 months late, and still slipping. The development contract was fixed price. Every dollar of overrun came out of the contractors' pockets. By the end of 1990, the program was $1 billion over budget, and the Pentagon's own auditors were finding that the program's official cost reports did not match what the contractors were actually spending. In November of 1990, the Navy's Deputy General Counsel, a lawyer named Chester Paul Beach, was asked to review the program. His internal report became known as the Beach Report. It told the Navy what the contractors had been hiding. The program was broken, the cost reports were inaccurate, and the schedule was unachievable. On December 17, 1990, the Navy sent the contractors a show cause letter. Explain why this contract should not be canceled for default. 3 weeks later, the Secretary of Defense did exactly that. Dick Cheney's statement at the announcement was a single paragraph long. It changed the next 23 years. The A-12 I did terminate. It was not an easy decision to make because it's an important requirement that we're trying to fulfill. But no one could tell me how much the program was going to cost, even just through the full-scale development phase, or when it would be available. And data that had been presented at one point a few months ago turned out to be invalid and inaccurate. The contractors had received more than $2 billion in progress payments. The Navy ordered them to give $1.35 billion of it back. McDonnell Douglas and General Dynamics did not agree. They filed suit the same year. The contractors argued the Navy had imposed a requirement no contractor could have met within the contract specifications, that the program had been impossible by design, and the default termination was unjust. They wanted the cancellation reclassified from default to convenience, which would mean a $1.2 billion payout instead of a $1.35 billion repayment. For 2 decades, the central legal fight was not about engineering. It was about whether the government could invoke the state secrets privilege to keep the contractors from making their defense by classifying the very technical specifications they would have used to prove the requirements were impossible. In May of 2011, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously. Justice Scalia wrote the opinion. The holding was not what either side had wanted. When litigation would force disclosure of state secrets, the courts may not try the claims and may not award relief to either party. The Navy did not collect the $1.35 billion. The contractors did not recover the $1.2 billion. Nobody won, and the case went back to the lower courts to figure out what to do with no possible verdict. In January 2014, 23 years after the cancellation, Boeing, which had absorbed McDonnell Douglas, and General Dynamics agreed to pay the Navy $400 million total, half from each company. General Dynamics' portion would be paid not in cash, but in design and construction credits on the Navy's DDG-1000 destroyer program. Nobody admitted fault. The A-6 Intruder flew until February 28, 1997. The Navy replaced it with bomb-carrying versions of the F-14 Tomcat and the F-A-18EF Super Hornet. Capable aircraft. Neither was a stealth aircraft. For 28 years after the A-12 was canceled, the Navy did not have a carrier-deployable platform that could penetrate a modern integrated air defense system the way the A-12 had been designed to. The gap was filled, eventually, by the F-35C. Initial operational capability declared on February 28, 2019. 28 years to the month after the program that was supposed to fill it was canceled. The engineering question the A-12 asked, could a carrier-capable, all-aspect stealth strike aircraft be built in the late 1980s, was never answered in metal. Neither the contractors nor the Navy ever proved their case. Under the Supreme Court's 2011 ruling, neither one ever could. The Supreme Court's answer was, nobody. If you want more military aviation engineering, the decisions that shaped every jet you know, subscribe to BingoFuel.